It's 1942. The world is at war, and on the busy shipping lanes of the often forgotten Northern Front, the movement of men and cargo takes place under the cover of darkness as the Allies' merchant fleet tries to avoid the wrath of Hitler's U-boats. On the rocky shoreline of Rathlin Island, just off the coast of Northern Ireland, the wind is howling, tearing the breath from your lungs. It's pitch black, save for the occasional flash of a distress flare cutting through the sleet. Out there, in the heaving darkness of the North Channel, a ship is sinking. A piece of Scotland being broken on the teeth of the coast. Men are in the water, and a simple human mistake is about to cost 23 lives. But this isn't just a story about a shipwreck. It's a story about innovation, about war, and about the strange, secret lives that Caledonian MacBraynes and those companies in that lineage had when history took its most extreme turns into war. Nowadays, the ferries of Caledonian MacBrayne whisk visitors to distilleries on Islay and the beaches of Harris, all while acting as a vital lifeline for the communities in the islands, bringing locals back and forth and transporting the goods to keep businesses running. Steel has a memory, though, and if you listen closely to the engines of the storied vessels that served the west coast of Scotland as part of the David MacBrayne, Hutcheson and Caledonian MacBrayne fleets, they echo with the distant hum of the world's first turbine-powered passenger ship, the voices of long-gone soldiers on the beaches of Dunkirk, and even the eerie silence of a floating nuclear bunker designed to outlive the apocalypse. Welcome to Scottish Island Adventures. I'm Tony Kearney. My family home is on the island of Barra, and I love Scotland's west coast islands, their people, wildlife and history. And over the next 8 episodes, we'll be welcoming guests who'll help you get the most out of your next visit to the Western Isles. Our routes were first established 175 years ago, with the first sailing of Hutcheson and Co. on the 10th of February 1851, a company which became David MacBrayne and later Caledonian MacBrayne. In this episode, we're celebrating our part in a historic lineage that stretches back 175 years by sharing with you some fascinating stories from the history of the companies which have formed the backbone of Scotland's ferries serving the west coast. Beyond serving islanders and holidaymakers, some of those ships have played their part in the wider struggle when Scotland has gone to war. Join me as we look at 3 stories of bravery, ingenuity and sheer grit from the history of Caledonian MacBrayne. Chapter 1. The Revolution. It's 1901 and Glasgow's River Clyde is the engine room of the British Empire. If you want a ship built, you come to Glasgow. If you want it built right, you go to the best shipyard on the river, Denny's of Dumbarton. But here, where the hammering of rivets is the pulsating heartbeat of the river, people are sensing changes afoot and are becoming increasingly edgy. There's a man called Charles Parsons. He's an engineer, an aristocrat, and frankly a bit of a nuisance to the shipbuilding establishment. A few years before, at the Royal Navy's Diamond Jubilee Fleet Review in 1897, Parsons took his tiny 30-foot experimental boat, the Turbina, and gate-crashed the parade. Zipping between the lines of battleships at speeds that were physically impossible for the stately steam engines of the day, the Navy patrol boats couldn't catch him. He made his point. The steam turbine was the future. But the Navy is slow to learn, and the merchant marine is conservative at best. They like big, heavy pistons that go thump, 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 shaking the teacups of the tables in the first-class saloon. They don't fancy any of this high-pitched, whining turbine nonsense. So, a syndicate is formed. John Williamson, a man with salt in his veins, teams up with Denny and Parsons to build a ship that, at best, could be described as a commercial gamble. They call her the King Edward. She doesn't look much like a revolution. She looks more like your classic Clyde steamer, sleek, white, with 2 funnels. But below the waterline, she is a freak. She doesn't run using heavy pistons. Instead, she has 3 shafts and, get this, 5 propellers, 2 on each of the wing shafts and 1 in the middle. The engineers are sweating. If this fails, the turbine syndicate loses everything. The trial begins. It's a grey day in the Firth of Clyde. The telegraph rings for full ahead. The steam hits the high-pressure turbine, and she goes. She hits 19 knots. It's fast, but not fast enough. The investors look at their shoes. The engineers look at their slide rules. It's a failure. The wonder ship is just a bit quick. And a bit quick doesn't make it for an industry-defining revolution. Parsons isn't done, though. A bit of tweaking and hammering, and she's back in the water. This time, she flies. 20.48 knots. No vibration, no thumping, just a smooth glide across the water. Overnight, the King Edward becomes the most popular ship on the river. The passengers love her because she doesn't spill their drinks. The owners love her because she burns less coal. She is the future, and everyone knows it. But the King Edward isn't just a fair-weather friend. In 1914, as the world implodes into global warfare, the excursion steamer's hull is painted drab grey as she morphs into her new role as a troop ship. And then she gets one of the strangest assignments in maritime history. The War Office needs ships to go to Russia, specifically the White Sea. They need to support the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War and treat the wounded. Who do they send? A destroyer? A heavy cruiser? No, they send the King Edward. Imagine this little steamer, designed for the waters of the Western Isles, punching through the freezing swells of the Arctic Circle. She's battered by storms that would swallow a lesser ship. Her crew, men her used to being home in Greenock for tea, are now dodging ice floes and Bolshevik mines. She serves as a hospital ship. Her glamorous saloons turned into wards, the smell of salt spray replaced by the smell of antiseptic and spilled blood. She survives. She comes home. She goes back to her old life as a pleasure steamer, taking families down the water for another 30 years. When she's eventually acquired by the Caledonian Steam Packet Company in 1943, she's serving in the Second World War II, acting as a tender on the Clyde. By 1951, she's 50 years old, a half-century of service. She's outlived the men who built her. She's outlived the empire she was named for. When she's finally scrapped in 1952, it's not because she's broken, it's just her time. Her turbines, the machines that changed the world, are saved. You can even see one of them today in all its glory in Glasgow's Riverside Museum. But when you look at that cold metal, try to remember the heart of that day in 1901. The gamble, the silence of the glide, and the little ship that went into war, along with so many others, and came home again. Chapter 2, The Warrior and the Mistake. It's May 1940. The SS Lochgarry is not a revolution. She's a workhorse. Built in 1898 as the Vulture, she spent her life hauling cows, cars and people between Scotland and Ireland. She's tough, riveted and unglamorous. By the time David MacBrayne buys her in 1937, she's already an old lady. But old ladies are so often up for the fight. Everyone knows the situation when the call comes in. The British Expeditionary Force, the entirety of the British Army, is trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk, pressed into the water by the inexorable creep of Nazi Germany's blitzkrieg on France. The Royal Navy needs everything that floats. The Lochgarry's requisitioned. She doesn't have armour, she doesn't have big guns. She has a hold designed for cattle and a crew of civilian sailors who suddenly find themselves sailing into the mouth of hell. Along with 850 ships and boats, some of them Clyde and West Highland vessels like her, she crosses the channel. The sky's black with smoke and burning oil. Stuka dive bombers are screaming down, dropping death on the beaches. The water is choked with wreckage and bodies. The Lochgarry, along with many of the other small vessels requisitioned, pushes into the harbour. She takes on men, not just a few. She packs over 1,000 soldiers into her holds, on her decks, and in the corridors. They're exhausted, bleeding, defeated. She pulls away and the Luftwaffe bombers spot them. They come in low. The sea erupts around her. Explosions rock the hull, shattering lights, throwing men off their feet. Small ships filled with civilian sailors and soldiers alike are going down all around her. But the Lochgarry and the other ships of the flotilla keep steaming. The old rivets hold. She makes her way through the minefields and the bombs, bringing her cargo of souls back to England. She's a hero. All of the small ships who went to Dunkirk are heroes. She's done her bit. You'd think that service would have earned her a quiet retirement. But war is greedy. It's January the 21st, 1942. The Lochgarry's on a new run. She's ferrying troops to the Faroe Islands. Britain has occupied the Faroes to stop the Nazis using them as a U-boat base. It is a miserable, cold, dangerous run. The North Atlantic in winter is a killer. She leaves Glasgow, heading for Oban to pick up her troops. She has 55 people on board, mostly crew. The weather is horrific. A full gale is blowing from the west, whipping the sea into a frenzy. The master's experienced. He knows these waters, but he's tired. Everyone is tired. The war's been going on for 3 long years. There are no lighthouses lit. The blackout is in force. Navigation is a game of dead reckoning and guesswork. The master of the ship peers into the driving sleet. He sees a shape in the darkness. He believes he's rounding the Mull of Kintyre, the long finger of land that points down towards Ireland. If he's right, he can turn north into the shelter of the Sound of Jura. He orders the helm over. The ship turns. He is not at the Mull of Kintyre. The gale has pushed the Lochgarry miles off course. He's actually much further south, off the coast of Northern Ireland. He isn't turning into the safety of the Sound. He's driving his ship straight into the rocks of Rathlin Island. The impact is sickening. Crunch! The ship shudders and stops dead. The noise of steel tearing on granite screams over the wind. Down below, the water rushes in. The master tries to back her off. It's a desperate move. The engines scream in reverse. She slides free, but the damage is fatal. She's taking on water fast. She's heavy, sluggish, dying. The order comes.
Abandon ship!
The darkness is absolute. The wind's howling so loud you have to shout to be heard. They launch the lifeboats. It's terrifying. The waves are smashing against the hull. Most of the crew make it into the boats. They drift away into the blackness, praying to hit land before the sea swallows them. But one boat, laden with 23 men, is unlucky. They're caught by the tide. They're swept north along the ragged coast of Rathlin Island. In the darkness, they don't see the rocks until it's too late. The lifeboat's picked up by a breaker and smashed against the shore. It capsizes. 23 men are thrown into the freezing, boiling surf. They're stokers, stewards, deckhands, men who survived the bombs of Dunkirk, men who survived the U-boats. They fight for air. They fight for a grip on the slippery rocks. None of them make it. The next morning, the islanders find the bodies. They find the master shivering on the shore with the survivors from the other boats. He's lost his ship. He's lost his men because of a wrong turn in the inky black night. The Lochgarry sits upright on the bottom of the sea today, a popular spot for divers. They swim through the holds that once carried the boys from Dunkirk. They see the tiled floors of the bathrooms, the porcelain toilets still bolted to the deck. It's a ghostly, quiet place. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear the wind from that night in 1942. Chapter 3. The Citadel. It's 1964. World War II is over. The Nazis are gone, but another frost has settled over the world. The Cold War is at its height. The Cuban Missile Crisis was just 2 years ago. People live their lives in the shadow of the mushroom cloud. In Aberdeen, Hall, Russell and Company are launching a new ferry for David MacBrayne's. She's called the MV Columba. She is beautiful in a blocky 1960s functional sort of way. She's designed to bring the modern world to the Scottish Islands and can carry 870 passengers and 50 cars. But there is something off about her and the other ships of her class, the Hebrides and the Clansman. If you're a tourist in 1965 driving your wee Austin Cambridge onto the car deck, you might notice the doors. They aren't just ramp doors, they are massive hydraulic guillotines. Thick steel. They look like they belong in a bank vault, not in a car ferry. And if you were a crew member, you might wonder about the decontamination rooms hidden near the engineer's accommodation. Showers that look like they belong in some science fiction B-movie. The Columba and her sisters the Hebrides and the Clansman have a secret. These Citadel-class ships are paid for by the British government, and the government has a plan if the balloon goes up. If the Soviets launch a nuclear strike against the British Isles, these ships are not going to be ferrying tourists to Mull. They will become floating nuclear bunkers. The plan is terrifyingly simple. As the sirens sound, the Columba will retreat to the deep, dark sea lochs of the west coast. The guillotine doors will slam shut, hermetically sealing the car deck. The ventilation system will switch to gas-tight, pressurising the interior so that radioactive dust cannot get in. And on the outside, a pre-wetting system. A network of sprinklers covers the entire superstructure. If the ship has to sail through a radioactive cloud, she will turn on the water, encasing herself in a shield of sea spray to wash the fallout overboard. Inside the Citadel, government officials, military commanders, the people who are left to run whatever remains of Scotland, will sit in the lounge, sipping tea, waiting for the radiation counters to stop clicking. The outcome never happens, of course. The Columba spends her life doing the hoist. She's a hoist loading ferry, which means she has to lift to get cars down to the pier. It is slow. It is agonisingly slow. As roll-on, roll-off ferries with ramps take over, the Columba becomes a dinosaur. By 1988, she's done. Caledonian MacBrayne retires her, and one of the most interesting ships ever to sail Scottish waters is destined for the scrapyard. But then, a miracle. A couple, Tony and Susan Binns, buy her. They don't want to scrap her. They want to turn her into a luxury cruise ship. People think they're mad. A car ferry, a nuclear bunker, luxury. They strip out the car deck, they tear out the cabins, and they create the Hebridean Princess. She becomes the most exclusive ship in Scotland. 50 passengers, 37 crew. It's like a floating country house hotel. The Tyree Lounge even has a brick fireplace, complementing the cabins and their tartan upholstery. And then she gets the ultimate seal of approval, and finally fulfills her role, catering to the great and the good of the nation, albeit in happier circumstances. In 2006, Queen Elizabeth II books the Hebridean princess to celebrate her 80th birthday. She loves it so much, she comes back in 2010. There's a wonderful story from the captain. He recalls the royals poring over the charts in the lounge, planning where they want to go for a beach picnic. Just a granny and her family on a boat. Imagine that. A ship built to survive the nuclear apocalypse, built with blast doors and decontamination showers, ending her days carrying the monarch on a holiday around the very islands she was meant to hide in. The Columba's still out there. If you look at the horizon off Skye or St Kilda, you might see her. She's small, blue-hulled, elegant. She doesn't look like a bunker anymore. But deep in her bones, under the luxury carpets, the steel of the citadel is still there. 3 ships. The King Edward, the ship whose early years on the Clyde proved that the future could be smooth and silent before becoming part of the Caledonian lineage in 1943. The Lochgarry, the warrior who saved thousands only to be betrayed by the dark. And the Columba, who carries a secret history of our darkest fears beneath her luxury veneer. They're all just steel and rivets, really. But they are also us. They're our ambition, our courage, and our paranoia. They're the vessels of our history, floating on the grey, restless waters of the West. That's all for this episode of Scottish Island Adventures. Please subscribe, like, rate, review, and share with your friends. We'll be dropping new episodes every fortnight full of great conversations with fantastic guests from the worlds of wellness, whisky, wildlife, heritage, and more. In the next episode, we'll be joined by Zara Mahmood, MBE, to talk about all the ways you can get outdoors when you visit the islands this year. Book your Caledonian MacBrayne Island adventure now. For show notes and more information, plus details on Caledonian MacBrayne's routes, timetables, prices and bookings, go to calmac.co.uk. You've been listening to Scottish Island Adventures. It was presented by me, Tony Kearney. It was written and produced by Michael Wilson Park, with engineering and mastering by Brian McAlpine for The Big Light. The executive producer was Fiona White.